The gym smelled like sweat, rubber, and something darker. She was unconscious before she hit the mat, and when she opened her eyes, gasping, cheeks wet, the man standing over her was laughing. 26 years old, a blue belt. She came to this gym to get stronger, not to be made an example of. Nobody moved, nobody said a word, but someone in the back of the room had just gone very, very still. He wasn't a competitor. He didn't wear a belt. He didn't need one. And the second that bully opened his mouth to laugh again, everything in that gym was about to change. If stories like this hit different for you, subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, turn on notifications, and stay until the end. Because what happens next in part 2 will leave you speechless. Portland doesn't get dramatic sunsets. It gets rain, the slow, grinding kind that soaks through jackets and sits in your shoes for the rest of the evening. The kind that makes everything feel heavier than it actually is. Emily Brooks pulled her gym bag tighter against her shoulder and jogged across the parking lot, head down, hood up. The neon sign above the entrance of Ironcrest Combat Academy buzzed and flickered in the wet dark. One of the letters had been half dead for months. Nobody had bothered to fix it. She noticed things like that now, small failures, things people stopped caring about. She pushed through the front door. Inside, the warmth hit first, then the smell. Sweat baked into the mats, disinfectant spray that never quite reached the corners, the faint metallic edge of a dehumidifier running in the back. A fluorescent tube overhead cycled through its familiar flicker before steadying. The sound of bodies moving, breathing, the slap of bare feet on canvas. It wrapped around her like something almost comfortable. Almost. She had been training at Ironcrest for 14 months, long enough to know which mat was slick near the far wall, long enough to know which locker stuck, long enough to know who to avoid. She changed quickly in the back, re-wrapped her left wrist, an old strain that never fully healed, and stepped out onto the mats with her blue belt tied tight. The evening class was already warming up. A dozen students in various stages of their grappling careers stretched, drilled, moved in pairs. A few nodded at Emily when she joined the circle. Most didn't. Ironcrest wasn't an unfriendly gym, exactly. It was just hierarchical. The kind of place where seniority didn't just mean experience, it meant authority, it meant space. It meant that certain people occupied the center of the mats like it was a birthright, and everyone else rotated around them. Victor Kane occupied the center. He was 29, a black belt for 2 years, with a build that looked engineered for intimidation. Broad shoulders, neck like a concrete pillar, hands that had been conditioned against heavy bags since he was 17. He moved like he owned every room he entered, which at Ironcrest he basically did. Victor wasn't the worst technician Emily had ever seen. He was actually good, legitimately good, in the structured, controlled environment of a sport gym, fast on his feet, sharp with grips, smart about angles. Under different circumstances, against a different kind of person, those skills might have amounted to something worth respecting. But Victor Kane hadn't spent the last 2 years teaching those skills. He'd spent them collecting them, hoarding them, and deploying them selectively against people who couldn't push back. Emily had watched him do it before. A nervous white belt who tapped 3 times before Victor let go. A new guy, maybe 150 pounds, who came in once and never came back. The women especially. He had a pattern with women. Not always physical. Sometimes it was the comment after a roll, the raised eyebrow, the way he'd let a submission linger just a second too long and then say, "You good?" with the kind of smile that meant he already knew the answer. Marcus Holloway, the head instructor, saw all of it. He was 61, third-degree black belt, former competitor with a wall full of photographs and zero current interest in anything that might cost him a paying member. Victor brought students. Victor competed and brought trophies. Victor's name was in the promotional materials on the front desk, so Marcus saw nothing. Emily knew the architecture of this place. She had studied it the way soldiers study terrain, not because she wanted to engage, but because she needed to know where the ground was unsafe. Tonight, she told herself, was just training, drill work, maybe a few controlled rolls with the purple belt she trusted, a guy named Daniel who kept his ego off the mat and his hands where they were supposed to be, in and out, no incidents. She almost made it. Sparring started 40 minutes into class. Marcus called rounds from a folding chair near the wall, arms crossed, watching with the particular passivity of a man who has decided that what happens on his mats is not, technically, his problem. Emily's first round was fine. Daniel, as expected, was clean, measured, patient. They went back and forth for 5 minutes. She caught half a triangle at one point, lost it, they reset. It felt like training was supposed to feel. Then Marcus called rotation. She ended up across from Victor. She knew immediately. She could feel it in the way the nearby students shifted. A slight physical reorientation, like iron filings responding to a magnet. Attention moving quietly toward the center of the room without anyone being obvious about it. Victor rolled his shoulders. He looked at her the way you look at a crossword puzzle you've already solved. "Blue belt?" he said, not quite a question. "Yeah," Emily said. "Cool." That was it. That was the whole conversation before he was on her. He came in fast and hard, harder than the round called for, harder than any reasonable reading of the situation justified. He drove through her guard like it was tissue paper. And it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. She had a solid closed guard. She had worked it for over a year. But he outweighed her by 65 pounds, and his first pass was launched with the kind of force you reserve for competition, not for a Tuesday night training session. She survived the first 30 seconds, framed, moved, kept her hips active. He reset. She could hear her own breathing. Then he took her back. It happened fast. She reached for a sweep she'd been drilling, and he countered it perfectly, slipped behind her, locked in the seatbelt grip. Classic rear-naked choke setup. She knew the position. She tapped her hand against his forearm, clearly, twice. He tightened. "Tap out if you need to," he said, and there was something wrong in his voice. Not concern, the performance of concern. She tapped again, 3 times. Her palm against his arm, explicit, unmistakable. His arm cinched tighter. The lights in the gym didn't literally go dark, but something happened to them. A narrowing, a tunnel, the way vision collapses when the blood stops reaching the brain. She felt her arms go light, felt the sounds of the gym stretch and distort, like someone had slowed a recording down. Then nothing. She came back to herself on the mat. Concrete ceiling, fluorescent tube, the smell of disinfectant. Someone nearby had their foot in her field of vision, wearing a black G bottom and no socks. She gasped. Her body did it before her mind caught up. A hard, involuntary inhale, like surfacing from underwater. Her hand went to her throat on instinct. Victor was standing over her. He wasn't crouching down to check on her. He was standing, upright, arms loose at his sides, looking down with his head slightly tilted. "You all right?" She sat up on her own. The gym swam for a moment, then steadied. She was aware of the other students watching. She was aware of the particular quality of that watching. The carefully neutral expressions, the eyes that slid away when she tried to meet them. "She tapped," someone said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't directed at anyone. It landed in the middle of the room and dissolved without a response. Victor spread his hands. "I didn't feel a tap. You sure you tapped? You got to tap clearer than that." He was smiling, not widely, just enough. "I tapped 3 times, Emily said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. She was grateful for that. "Hey, I didn't feel it." He shrugged. "Blue belt's got to be more decisive. If you're not committed to the tap, how are you going to be committed to the fight?" A few nervous laughs from the edges of the room, the kind of laugh that says, "Please don't point the camera at me." Emily stood up. Her left knee wobbled for a second before it steadied. She didn't let herself reach for anything. Victor turned toward the rest of the class like he was wrapping up a teaching moment. That's the thing about chokes. People think they have more time than they do. The window is shorter than you think. You go to sleep, you go to sleep. That's the game. He said it like a lecture, like she was a prop in a demonstration he hadn't asked her permission to be in. Nobody said anything. Marcus Holloway, from his folding chair near the wall, uncrossed and recrossed his arms. He looked at the clock on the wall. 2-minute break, he said. Then we'll do positional. Emily walked to the edge of the mats. She sat down against the wall, knees pulled up, and worked on her breathing the way she'd been taught. Slow exhale, count to 4, don't let your hands shake. They shook anyway, just slightly. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs. She was not going to cry. She had made that rule for herself months ago, not because crying was weak. She didn't believe that anymore. but because Victor Kane did not deserve to see what he'd put inside her. That was hers. He didn't get it. She reached for her water bottle. That was when she noticed the man standing at the edge of the room. He was over by the equipment rack near the side entrance, the door that the long-term members sometimes use to cut through from the parking structure. He was wearing a plain gray pullover and dark pants, a gym bag dropped at his feet, arms loose at his sides. He wasn't warming up. He wasn't on his phone. He was just standing there, very still, watching the center of the mat. She almost didn't recognize him. He'd cut his hair shorter since the last time she'd seen him, and he'd lost some weight. Not in a concerning way, in the way that men lose weight when they've been working rather than living. He looked older than 34. The eyes especially. Adrian, her older brother. She hadn't known he was coming tonight, hadn't known he was even back in Portland. She opened her mouth, some automatic greeting forming, and then she stopped, because she could see his face. Adrian Brooks had a particular quality that most people couldn't read because most people had no frame of reference for it. It wasn't anger. Anger was hot, animated, visible. What was on Adrian's face right now was something different, a flatness, a stillness, the kind you only develop after spending years in environments where showing emotion before you intended to was a liability that cost lives. He had been watching. She didn't know for how long. Long enough. His eyes moved from the center of the mat to her face. They stayed there for a moment. She saw him register the redness around her throat. She saw him register the way she was sitting, the controlled posture of someone working very hard to appear unaffected. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. Don't. He looked back at the mat. The 2-minute break ended. Students began filtering back toward the center. Victor rolled his shoulders again, said something to one of the other black belts that made the man laugh. Emily was still sitting against the wall. She heard footsteps, unhurried even, and then Adrian sat down beside her. Not dramatically, just sat. "When'd you get in?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Yesterday." "You could have called." "I did. You didn't answer." She had turned her ringer off for training. She remembered now. A silence stretched between them. On the mat, Marcus was positioning 2 students for positional drilling, talking through a guard pass with his hands. "How long has that been going on?" Adrian said. She didn't answer immediately. "He's a black belt," she said finally. "He's been here longer than me. The coach doesn't—" "That's not what I asked." She looked at the water bottle in her hands. "A few months." Another silence. "You want to leave?" he said. Just that. No judgment in it. "No," she said, and she meant it. "I paid through the end of the month." She watched him process that. She watched him look at the mat again, at Victor, at Marcus in his chair. "Okay," Adrian said. He stood up, picked up his gym bag, set it back down again by the wall, reached down and pulled off his socks, tucked them into his shoes. "Adrian," she said. He looked at her. "Don't do anything stupid." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, passing through on its way somewhere else. "Define stupid," he said. He walked to the edge of the mat and stopped. In a gym like Iron Crest, unknown faces weren't unusual. People visited, prospective members came to watch, former students dropped in. Adrian's presence at the equipment rack had been invisible precisely because he looked like he belonged. Not to the gym specifically, but to the general category of man who had been around training spaces long enough that they occupied them without comment. But now he was at the mat's edge, and people noticed. Victor noticed. He was mid-conversation with the other black belt when his eyes moved, the automatic sweep of the room that dominant personalities perform without realizing, and landed on Adrian. He assessed. Height, build, age. The gray pullover. The bare feet, which meant intent. Victor's chin lifted just slightly. "You looking to roll?" he called across the mat. Adrian stepped onto the canvas. "Sure," he said. His voice was quiet. Not soft exactly. There was weight in it, the kind of weight that doesn't need volume. He moved toward the center of the mat with the particular economy of someone who had long ago stopped wasting movement and stood there, arms at his sides, waiting. Victor spread his hands with a performer's ease, turning slightly to make sure the room was watching. They were. "You got any experience? I don't want to hurt anybody." "Little bit," Adrian said. Victor smiled. He looked at the other black belt. The other black belt looked away. Okay, Victor said. Let's see it. The buzzer hadn't sounded. They didn't need it. These things had their own rhythm. Victor moved first. He shot in fast and hard, the same energy he'd brought against Emily, the same confidence, and met something he had not prepared for. Adrian sidestepped, not athletically, not with any drama. He simply was no longer where he had been, and one hand caught Victor's wrist and the other found the back of his collar, and the redirect happened so efficiently that for a half second the watching students genuinely weren't sure what they'd seen. Then Victor was airborne. Not for long, but long enough. He came down hard, the full uncontrolled drop of a man who expected ground that wasn't there, and the crack of canvas under his weight filled the gym like a gunshot. The entire room flinched. Adrian was already behind him, one knee into the upper back, both hands controlling the wrist and the collar. Victor bucked, twisted, tried to use his size to roll, and nothing gave. The pressure was specific and total, the kind that doesn't feel like muscle so much as geometry, like every escape route had been accounted for before it was attempted. Victor's face hit the mat. He turned it to the side, chest heaving. The gym was completely silent. Adrian's expression had not changed. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't even particularly settled in. He looked like a man doing something he could do for a long time without much effort. Victor's free hand slapped the mat, once, hard. Adrian held the position for 3 more seconds. Then he released, stood, and stepped back. Victor lay still for a moment. Then he pushed himself up onto hands and knees, and then to standing, and when he turned around his face had gone a particular shade of red that had nothing to do with exertion. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved around the room, collecting witnesses, calculating. "What the hell was that?" he said. Adrian looked at him. "You asked to see it," he said. The silence in the room was the kind that has mass. Victor's hand came up and pointed across the mat. "That's assault. You hear me? You came in here, you don't belong here, and you put your hands on me without my... You invited me to roll. I'm a black belt at this gym, and you think you can just... You choked my sister unconscious." The words landed like a door closing. Victor stopped. For the first time all night, possibly for the first time in longer than that, the room's attention shifted away from him and toward something he couldn't control. Emily, still sitting against the wall, felt every eye in the gym find her. Victor's jaw worked. His eyes moved to her, then back to Adrian. "Your sister," he repeated. "Yeah." The silence stretched. Then Marcus Holloway stood up from his folding chair, and the sound of it scraping against the floor was the loudest thing in the room. Marcus Holloway was not a small man. 6'1", maybe 220, with the particular density of someone who had spent 4 decades building a body before the knees started filing their complaints. He moved across the mat with the slow deliberateness of authority, not rushing, because rushing implied the situation required urgency, and acknowledging urgency meant acknowledging that something had gone wrong on his watch. He stopped a few feet from the center of the room. His eyes moved from Victor, still flushed and breathing through his nose, to Adrian, who had not moved from where he stood. "Somebody want to tell me what happened here?" His voice carried the practiced neutrality of a man who had managed conflict for 30 years by making himself the calmest presence in the room. It was a skill. Emily had watched him use it before, usually to dissolve situations before they cost him anything. Victor pointed. "This guy came onto the mat uninvited and..." "You invited me," Adrian said. Flat, not argumentative, just accurate. "I didn't invite you to shut..." "Victor." Marcus held up one hand without looking at him. He was looking at Adrian. "I don't know you. You a member here?" "No." "You been here before?" "No." "Then you came in off the street, walked onto my mat, and put hands on one of my students." He let that sit for a moment. "You see how that's a problem for me?" Adrian looked at him for a moment, not challenging exactly, more like he was reading something, some text printed on Marcus's face that Marcus wasn't aware was visible. "Your student," Adrian said, "choked my sister unconscious and laughed about it." Marcus's expression didn't change. That was the tell. Not a flinch, not a redirect, just the particular stillness of a man who already knew the thing he was being told and had already decided what it was worth to him. "I didn't see what you're describing," Marcus said. "No," Adrian said. "I don't think you did." Something in the phrasing made Marcus's jaw tighten. Not the words themselves, the implication underneath them, the suggestion that not seeing was a choice. Emily stood up from the wall. Her knee was steady now. She walked toward the center of the mat, not quickly, and stopped a few feet from her brother's shoulder. "He didn't feel my tap," she said. Her voice was even. She had decided, somewhere between sitting down and standing up, that she was going to be precise. She was going to use words correctly. "I tapped 3 times, with my palm, on his forearm." He tightened the choke. She looked at Victor when she said it, not with heat, just with the specific, careful attention of someone making sure the record was straight. Victor spread his hands. "I told you, I didn't—" "I watched it," said a voice from behind them. Everyone turned. It was Daniel, the purple belt, the one Emily had trusted, the one who kept his ego off the mat. He was standing at the edge of the training group, arms crossed, not particularly comfortable, but apparently done being silent. He was maybe 23, compact, with the kind of face that went serious with effort. "She tapped," he said. "Twice, at least. Maybe more. I was right there." The room shifted again. Small, but perceptible. The way a crowd shifts when the balance point changes. Victor's eyes moved to Daniel. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "I'm sure about that." The word "yeah" landed harder than it should have, because it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a challenge. It was just a guy saying a true thing in a room full of people who had gotten used to not saying true things, and the contrast was almost violent. Victor looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the clock. "All right," Marcus said finally. "Let's everybody take a breath. Visitor," he turned back to Adrian. "I'm going to need you to step off the mat. We can talk about this in my office, but right now you're on my mat without membership, and that's a liability issue." "He assaulted me," Victor said. "I want his information. I'm serious, Marcus. That's assault. I could press—" "Victor." Quieter this time, a warning wrapped in a name. Victor stopped, but his eyes didn't leave Adrian. Adrian looked at Emily, a question without words. "You want to go?" She shook her head once, barely. "Not yet." He turned back to Marcus. "I'll step off the mat," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere." He sat on the bench along the far wall, the one reserved for guests and observers, and he folded his hands between his knees, and he waited. That was the thing about Adrian that most people misread. The stillness. They assumed it was patience, the practiced calm of someone who had learned to manage their temper. And maybe once it had been. But what it actually was, what it had become over years Emily only partially understood, was something closer to assessment. He was never not doing something. He was reading the room, cataloging exits, listening to the texture of voices for the thing underneath the words. She had watched him do it at their mother's kitchen table, at airports, at the VA waiting room 2 years ago when she'd driven him to an appointment he hadn't wanted to go to. He did it automatically, the way other people breathe. He'd been out for 18 months now, formally out, papers signed, the whole institutional machinery of separation completed. Before that, 11 years, 3 deployments, a specialty she still only partially understood, and he described, when he described it at all, as close-in work. She'd learned not to ask for specifics. She'd learned that the specifics weren't what mattered anyway. What mattered was what they'd left in him and what they'd taken out. What they'd left was the stillness. What they'd taken was... She wasn't entirely sure. Some part of the range between what happened and what he let himself feel about it. He wasn't broken. She didn't think that. He was just compressed. Like something had been packed down very tight and the outside surface had hardened around it. He was watching Victor now, from across the gym, the way you watch something you've already categorized. Training resumed, or it tried to. Marcus called the class back to the positional drills, his voice carrying the specific authority of a man who needed the situation to be over before it became something he had to address. Students moved, bodies paired up. The mats filled with the sounds of controlled exertion. But the atmosphere had changed. The quality of attention in the room was different. People moving through drills while their actual focus remained on the bench by the far wall, on the two people standing near it, on Victor, who was still on the mat but not quite present in the way he usually was. Emily sat beside Adrian, not close enough to be conspicuous, close enough to talk quietly. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. I was handling it." He looked at her, not arguing, just looking. "Okay," he said. "I know that too." She picked at the edge of her wrist wrap. The Velcro was starting to fray. She'd been meaning to replace it for weeks. "How long were you standing there?" she asked. "Long enough." "Adrian." "Maybe 10 minutes. I came in through the side. You were still in the first round when I got there." He paused. "I saw the whole thing with Victor." She didn't say anything. The sound of the class around them filled the space. "I've seen that before," he said, quieter. Not to her specifically, maybe to himself. That particular thing. Somebody in a position to stop it, deciding it's not their problem. Everybody else deciding the same thing in the same second. He was looking at Marcus now, at the back of his head. It's not a gym thing, it's not a military thing, it's just a people thing, but it's worse when the guy at the top makes it systemic. She turned to look at him. "What do you mean, systemic?" "Victor didn't invent this. He's operating inside a structure that lets him operate. Marcus built that structure. Marcus maintains it. Victor's just the most visible product of it." He looked at his hands for a moment. If Victor left tomorrow, Marcus would find another Victor, because that's what the structure needs. Emily thought about the white belt who'd stopped coming, the new guy at 150 pounds, the look on Marcus's face when she'd said he tapped 3 times, that brief, contained flash of calculation, the instant reweighing of options. "He's not going to do anything," she said. "Marcus, he's not going to address it." "No," Adrian said. "He's not." "So what does that mean?" He didn't answer right away. Across the gym, Victor was drilling with one of the other black belts, back to his usual self, moving with his usual confidence, talking in the easy, proprietary way he talked when he felt like he'd survived something. "I don't know yet," Adrian said. Cut it. The class was winding down, the last 15 minutes given over to free rolling, the informal end-of-session rounds that went lighter and looser than the earlier structured sparring. People moved at their own pace. Conversations started. Water bottles appeared. Victor moved through it like he owned it, as usual. He rolled with the other black belt for a while, fluid and controlled, putting on a subtle performance for the room. He was reclaiming space. Emily recognized the behavior. She'd seen it in enough environments to name it. When someone in a dominant position gets challenged, the first instinct is to reassert, to demonstrate that the hierarchy hasn't shifted, to make the room remember where things stood before the interruption. He worked his way around the mat, and then, deliberately or not, she was never quite sure afterward, he ended up in the open space closest to the observer's bench. He stopped, looked at Adrian. "You do BJJ?" he said. The tone was almost conversational. Almost. "Some," Adrian said. "Where'd you train?" "Different places." Victor nodded slowly. He had his arms crossed, which on his frame was a particular kind of statement. "Because that wasn't BJJ. That was something else." "Sure." "So what was it?" Adrian looked at him for a moment. "Does it matter?" Something moved across Victor's face. A reassessment. He'd been expecting either deference or aggression, and he'd gotten neither, and the absence of a predictable response was bothering him in a way he couldn't quite locate. "You training anywhere now?" Victor asked. "Not formally." Victor unfolded his arms. "You've got good instincts. Wrong venue for it, but—" "Victor," Adrian said. Victor stopped. "I don't want to talk about my training." Adrian's voice had stayed at the same register the entire conversation. Unhurried, unperformed. "I want you to understand what happened tonight, and I want you to understand it clearly, because I think you've been here long enough that nobody's said it to you directly." He paused. "You put my sister to sleep because you could. Not because the situation called for it. Not because it was good training. Because she was smaller than you and you could, and nobody in this room was going to stop you." He let that sit. "That's not a martial art. That's just cruelty with a dress code. The gym had gone quiet around them. Not completely. There were still sounds, still movement, but the immediate vicinity had stilled in that particular way that happens when everyone in a room is pretending not to listen. Victor's jaw shifted. The performer's ease was gone. What was underneath it wasn't quite what Emily expected. It wasn't the clean, simple anger she'd braced for. It was something more tangled, defensive and offended in a way that suggested somewhere inside the architecture of his ego, something had actually landed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Okay," Adrian said. "You came in here, you don't know me, you don't know this gym, you don't know the dynamic. I know what I watched. And you think 20 minutes of watching gives you the right to tell me what I am." "I didn't tell you what you are," Adrian said. "I told you what you did. That's different." Victor stared at him. His breathing had picked up slightly. His hands had moved down to his sides. And then Marcus's voice cut across the gym. "Victor." Not a warning this time, a summons. Victor held Adrian's gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked toward the front of the mats where Marcus was waiting with his arms folded and his expression settled into something carefully neutral. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She watched them from across the gym. Marcus and Victor in low conversation near the instructor's desk, their voices not carrying, their body language telling most of the story anyway. Marcus with his arms crossed and his chin slightly down, the posture of a man absorbing something. Victor with his hands moving, arguing a point, the shift of his weight suggesting frustration rather than contrition. Daniel came and sat on the far end of the bench. He didn't look at Emily directly. He looked at the mat in front of him and unwrapped his hands in slow, methodical turns. "I should have said something sooner," he said. Emily looked at him. "I mean, before. Not just tonight. Other times." He wasn't looking for absolution, she thought. He was just saying it, putting it down somewhere outside himself because carrying it alone had started to cost him something. "Yeah," she said. "It's... the whole thing with Marcus is..." He stopped, started again. "If you say anything, you're the problem. If you leave, he wins. If you stay, it keeps happening. There's no good option." "I know," Emily said. "I'm just saying I should have." He finally looked at her. He was young, she remembered. 23, maybe. Some people needed longer to figure out which things were worth the cost. She had needed longer herself. "For what it's worth." "It's worth something," she said. "You said it tonight." He nodded, went back to unwrapping his hands. Adrian was still on the bench, watching Marcus and Victor. His expression gave nothing away, but she'd known him long enough to read the microsignals. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers had stilled rather than relaxed. He was listening to something, or waiting for something. "Adrian," she said quietly. What are you listening for?" He glanced at her. A beat. "Whether Marcus defends him or manages him, there's a difference." She looked back across the gym. Marcus was talking now, his hands moving in the particular chopping gestures he used when he was emphasizing something to a student. Victor was listening, arms recrossed, head down. She couldn't hear words. She watched body language. "Which is it?" she asked. Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Defends," he said. Marcus walked towards them alone. Victor went to the back of the gym, grabbed his water bottle, sat down with his back to the room. The other students found reasons to look elsewhere. Marcus stopped in front of the bench. He looked at Emily first. "You're a member here," he said. "I take that seriously. If you felt the role tonight went too far, I hear that." He delivered it with the particular smoothness of someone who had rehearsed variations of this speech before, calibrated. Specific enough to sound responsive, vague enough to commit to nothing. "Victor's been a student here for 6 years. He's one of our most experienced He ignored her tap, Adrian said. Marcus looked at him. "I didn't see it." "Daniel did." A fractional pause. "Daniel's a purple belt. Calls during live sparring are..." "You knew," Adrian said. "Not tonight specifically, but you knew the pattern." Marcus's composure held. It was good composure, built over decades probably, but something under it stiffened. That's a serious accusation. Yes, Adrian said. It is. The silence between them had a different quality than the earlier silences. Less charged, more deliberate. Two people standing on either side of something and both knowing exactly where the line was. I'm going to need you to leave, Marcus said. You're not a member. You came onto my mat uninvited. He invited me. And you've disrupted a class and now you're making accusations that I'm not leaving, Adrian said. Marcus blinked. Just once. Excuse me? My sister is a paying member of this gym. I'm her guest. I have every right to sit on that bench. He held Marcus's gaze. And I'll be here every time she's here until this is handled, or until she decides she doesn't want to come back. Either way, that's her choice. Emily felt something move through her chest. Not quite surprise, not quite gratitude. Something closer to recognition. The specific feeling of someone standing behind you and meaning it. Marcus looked at her. Is this what you want? She met his eyes. I want what happened tonight acknowledged. Emily, on the record, in writing, if there's a process for it, an acknowledgement that Victor Kane ignored a tap and held a submission past the point of safety. She kept her voice steady. She had thought about this while she was sitting against the wall with her hands shaking. She had put it into words then, and the words were still good now. That's what I want. Marcus's jaw worked once. I'll review the situation and... That means no, Adrian said. Marcus looked at him sharply. Reviewing the situation, Adrian said, means waiting for this to get quiet and then deciding nothing needs to happen. I've sat through enough briefings to know what review means when the answer's already decided. A muscle moved below Marcus's eye. It was small. It was the first crack in the composure. You want to tell me how I run my gym? He said. No, Adrian said. I want you to run it like you care what happens to the people in it. The gym was very quiet. Across the room, Victor was watching from his seat, water bottle in his hand, expression unreadable from this distance. Marcus breathed in slowly, out slowly. Class is over, he said, loud enough for the room. Good work tonight, everybody. See you Thursday. He looked at Adrian one more time. Something moved through his eyes. An assessment, a recalculation. And then he turned and walked toward his office without another word. The door closed behind him. Not slammed, just closed. The room began its end-of-class exhale. People peeled off wrist wraps, rolled up GIs, talked in low voices. The usual rhythms of departure. But it wasn't the usual end of class. Emily could feel it. The particular charge that stays in a room after something has been disturbed, but not resolved. Like the pressure before a storm that has stalled. Victor stood up from his seat across the gym. He walked his water bottle to the rack by the far wall. He took his time. He pulled his GI jacket straight, adjusted his belt. Then he turned and looked at Adrian from across the room. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look was a complete sentence, maybe a paragraph. Adrian looked back at him, just looked. Victor smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that's a statement rather than an expression, and walked toward the locker room. Emily watched him go. This isn't over, she said. No, Adrian agreed. He reached down for his gym bag. It's not. She looked at him. In the flat fluorescent light, with the class dispersing around them and the rain still audible against the windows, she could see the tiredness in his face that the stillness usually hid. The particular tiredness of someone who has been in rooms like this before, not gyms specifically, but rooms with the same architecture of power and complicity, and knows exactly how they tend to end. What happens next? She said. He looked toward Marcus's office door, still closed. He looked at the locker room Victor had disappeared into. He looked at Daniel, still on the far end of the bench, still working through whatever he was working through. Somebody makes a move, Adrian said. And then we see what everyone's actually made of. He picked up his bag. He waited for Emily to gather hers. And through the glass panel beside Marcus's office door, barely visible at this angle in the dim light, a shape moved. Marcus Holloway standing at his desk, phone to his ear, talking to someone, not reviewing the situation, making a call. Emily saw it. Adrian saw it. Neither of them said anything about it, but they didn't look away either, and the weight of that small lit rectangle of glass followed them all the way to the door. The rain hadn't let up. Emily pushed through the front door of Ironcrest first, and the cold hit her face like a correction. Sharp, clean, the kind of cold that cuts through the residue of a bad room. She stood under the narrow overhang above the entrance and breathed it in while Adrian came through behind her, gym bag over one shoulder, the door swinging shut with a hydraulic sigh. The parking lot was mostly empty now. A few cars left, rain-slicked, the neon sign above the door still cycling through its half-dead flicker. Somewhere across the street, a dumpster lid was banging in the wind, rhythmic and dull. Emily looked at her car. She looked at her brother. He was calling Victor, she said. Probably. So what does that mean for Thursday? Adrian pulled his hood up. He was quiet for a moment. Not the thinking kind of quiet, but the kind where the answer was already formed and he was deciding how much of it to say. It means, don't come Thursday without me. She looked at him. Adrian, I'm not saying don't come. I'm saying don't come alone. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The dumpster lid banged again. She pulled her keys out and turned them over in her hand, the metal edges catching the light. I don't want you to make this your thing, she said. I want to handle it. You are handling it. I'm just going to be nearby while you do. She looked at him a moment longer, then looked away. Fine, she said. Thursday. She walked to her car. He watched until she was inside and the engine caught, and then he turned up his collar and walked the other direction into the rain without looking back. Thursday came the way bad things usually do. Ordinary on the outside, wrong underneath. The morning was gray and flat. Emily taught a reading group at the elementary school where she worked as a classroom aide, 23 third graders sounding out words with a focus that adults had mostly lost. And she watched them and felt, briefly, like the events of Tuesday were something that had happened to a different version of herself. Then lunch came and she checked her phone and there was a message from Ironcrest. A group text to all members sent from Marcus's account, the gym's standard contact number. Reminder, Thursday evening class format adjusted. Advanced students only from 7 to 8 p.m. All belt levels welcome 8 to 9 p.m. Questions, see front desk. She read it twice. Advanced students only, 7 to 8. She was a blue belt. She would not qualify for the first hour, which meant that for 60 minutes, Victor and his allies would have the mat without her, without Adrian, without Daniel, who was a purple belt and would, technically, be allowed in that first hour, though whether he'd use it was another question. She stared at the message for a long time. She forwarded it to Adrian. His response came back in under a minute. I see it. Then, 30 seconds later, still Thursday. We go at 8. She picked him up at 7:45. He was waiting outside the apartment building he was staying at, a short-term place, the kind with thin walls and a parking lot that smelled like exhaust. And he got into the passenger seat without ceremony, gym bag between his feet. You eat? She said. Yeah. Sleep? He looked at her sideways. It's a question, she said. Some, he said. Enough. She pulled out of the lot. The rain had stopped sometime in the afternoon, leaving the streets dark and mirror slick under the streetlights. She drove the familiar route on autopilot while Adrian watched the city go past his window with the detached attention he brought to most things. Not absent, just not needing to comment on everything he saw. There's going to be more of them tonight, she said. Victor's people. Yes. Marcus restructured the class to stack the room before we got there. Yes. Does that worry you? He thought about it for a second. Actually thought she could tell. The slight forward lean, the stillness that preceded an honest answer rather than a reflexive one. Not particularly, he said. Worried would mean I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting it. That's not the same as being prepared for it. No, he agreed. But it helps. The parking lot at Ironcrest had more cars than usual for a Thursday. Emily counted them without meaning to. 11, maybe 12, more than the standard evening turnout. Through the front windows, she could see the mats were still occupied, the advanced class running over or simply not clearing out the way they were supposed to. She and Adrian sat in the car for a moment. You don't have to go in, he said. Not gently, exactly, just factually. the way you state a genuine option. I know, she said. She got out of the car. The atmosphere inside was different from Tuesday in a way that took a moment to locate. It was louder. For one, more bodies, more voices, the specific pitch of a room that has been primed for something without being told explicitly what. The advanced class had not fully cleared. Several of its members were still on the mats, ostensibly cooling down, in practice forming a kind of audience that hadn't announced itself as one. Victor was among them. Of course he was. He was at the far end of the mats in conversation with two men Emily didn't recognize, not regulars, faces she'd never seen, both built and both wearing ranked belts. They'd come from somewhere else. Marcus had made calls plural, not singular. Marcus himself was at the front, arms folded, watching Emily and Adrian come through the door with the careful expression of a man monitoring a situation he believed he had under control. He had rearranged his room. Emily could feel the geometry of it, where people were standing, how the space was distributed, who had been positioned near whom. It was the kind of arrangement that looked organic and wasn't. A few of the regular Thursday students filtered in behind them. Daniel was there, she noticed, earlier than expected, which meant he'd come for the advanced hour too, which meant he'd made a choice about which side of this he was going to stand on. He caught her eye from across the room and gave one small nod that communicated approximately 10 things. She nodded back. Marcus moved to the center of the mats. Let's get started. 8 o'clock class. Warm up. 2 laps. Then we'll move into drilling. The class began its mechanical processes. Emily joined the warm-up circle, moving through the familiar sequence. Shrimping, Granby rolls, hip escapes, while around her the room arranged itself in real time. The two unfamiliar men stayed on the mat, joining the class without introduction, which Marcus allowed without comment. Victor drifted to the edges and then back in, the way a predator circles without committing. Adrian sat on the bench. He had not been challenged at the door. He had signed the guest waiver at the front desk, the same one the gym kept by the sign-in sheet, the one that existed precisely so guests could sit and observe. And now he sat with his bag at his feet and his eyes moving across the room in the same quiet, systematic way as Tuesday, cataloging everything and showing nothing. After the warm-up, Marcus paired students for drilling. He moved through the group with deliberate intention, assigning partners in a pattern that Emily recognized only gradually. The newer students paired with each other, the regulars paired with the unfamiliar ringers, an architecture designed to isolate and pressure rather than develop. She was paired with one of the unknown men. He was maybe 32, dark-haired, a brown belt. He introduced himself with a first name she didn't catch, shook her hand with just slightly more grip than the situation called for, and settled into stance with the easy confidence of someone who trained hard and consistently. The drill was guard passing, controlled, specific, supposed to be cooperative. He was not cooperative, not obviously, not in any way she could point to directly, but in the accumulated small choices of someone applying 70% of competition pressure in a context that called for 50, testing reactions, measuring what she gave back. She gave back clean technique. She'd been drilling guard retention for 6 months, and her frames were where they were supposed to be, and her hips were active. And after the third exchange, he readjusted, not backing off, but recalibrating. She was not what he'd expected. Across the mat, Daniel was drilling with the other unfamiliar man. She could see in her peripheral vision a similar dynamic playing out. Pressure applied at the edge of cooperation, the testing that happens when you want information without asking for it directly. Victor was not drilling. He was watching. He stood near the equipment wall with his arms loose and his eyes on Adrian, and he had been watching for the better part of 20 minutes, which meant he was doing the same thing Adrian was doing, and the symmetry of it was the most uncomfortable thing in the room. Marcus called a water break. Emily stepped to the edge of the mat. Her mouth was dry, and her left wrist was aching in the specific way it ached when she'd been gripping hard under pressure. She reached for her water bottle. The brown belt who'd been drilling with her materialized at her elbow, closer than necessary. "You train long?" he said. Conversational, light. "About 14 months, she said. "You're pretty solid for 14 months. "Thanks." A beat. "You the one Victor had the issue with Tuesday?" She looked at him. That's one way to describe it. He nodded slowly, like he was processing information. Victor's a good guy, he said. Gets intense sometimes, competitive. I think there might have been some miscommunication about. There wasn't, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. He ignored my tap, she said. 3 times. That's not miscommunication. That's a choice. The brown belt's expression didn't change exactly. Something behind it did. You sure you tapped clearly? Sometimes in a scramble? I'm sure. Another beat. He looked toward the bench where Adrian was sitting. That your brother? Yes. He military? She didn't answer immediately. He's got that thing, the brown belt said. The way he sits, the way he watches a room. I've seen it before. Lots of people sit on benches, Emily said. The brown belt almost smiled. It didn't reach anywhere. Sure, he said, and moved away. Sparring started at 8:40. Marcus called the first round and the pairing happened the way everything had happened tonight. By arrangement rather than rotation, the geography of the room shifting people toward particular partners in a way that looked like chance and wasn't. Emily ended up across from the brown belt again. Daniel ended up with the other ringer. 3 of Victor's regular allies spread across the mat with the newer students. And Victor walked to the center of the mat, turned, and looked at the bench. Visitor, he said. You want to roll? The room went quiet. Not completely. The shuffling of bare feet, the creak of the mat, but the voices stopped, and people who had been in motion stilled. Adrian looked up from the bench. The moment held for a second. 2 seconds. Long enough for every person in the room to understand what was happening. That this was not an invitation, that it was a thing performed in front of an audience that had been arranged specifically to watch it. Adrian set down his bag. Sure, he said. He stood up, pulled off his shoes, his socks, walked to the edge of the mat and stepped onto the canvas in the same unhurried way he'd done on Tuesday, and the sound of his feet on the mat was very quiet in a very quiet room. Victor smiled. The real one this time. Not the performer's version, not the management smile. The one underneath, the one that didn't need an audience because it existed for its own reasons. No hard feelings from Tuesday, Victor said. Just want to see what you actually got. Clean round, full rules. He glanced toward Marcus. Unless the head instructor has a problem with it. Marcus's arms were folded. His expression was the one Emily had come to understand as his default setting in moments of conflict. Calibrated neutrality, carefully maintained, designed to allow whatever was about to happen to be technically deniable as something he'd sanctioned. Keep it clean, Marcus said. That was all. The other students had formed the ambient audience that these things always generated, the ring of bodies that appears without anyone announcing it, the 2 unfamiliar ringers near their respective corners, Daniel standing apart, alone, watching with his arms at his sides. Emily stood at the mat's edge. Victor and Adrian squared up at the center. No ceremonial bow. Victor didn't offer one, which was itself a statement, and Adrian didn't require it. Victor moved first. He was smarter than Tuesday. He'd had 2 days to think about what had happened, to rerun the footage in his head, to identify the moment where his forward rush had been redirected. He came in with more control this time, lower, feeling for the grip rather than committing to the shot. His hands working for collar and sleeve in the standard opening of someone who intended to control the clinch before taking anything to the ground. His right hand found Adrian's collar. Adrian let it. That was the first thing Emily noticed. The permission. The deliberate non-response to the grip. The choice to let Victor establish something that could have been denied. She didn't understand it yet. She filed it. Victor tightened the grip, drove forward with his shoulder, tried to break Adrian's posture down and pull him into a throw. Adrian absorbed it. His base dropped. His weight shifted. Not resisting so much as simply not being where the force expected him to be. Victor's throw went half and landed nowhere, and for a strange, suspended moment they were clinched together in the center of the mat, neither moving. Then Victor switched, abandoned the collar, shot for a double leg, drove with everything he had. He hit something like a wall. Not a sprawl. Adrian hadn't moved his hips back. He had simply stopped moving forward, and the difference in base was significant enough that Victor's drive, full weight and committed, absorbed into it, and died there, like pushing a car that was in park. A sound from the room, not words, just the involuntary exhale of 20 people watching something they hadn't expected. Victor scrambled up and back. His chest was moving faster now. His eyes had changed. The calculation in them had shifted registers, updating in real time. "Okay," he said under his breath. Not to Adrian, not to anyone. He came again. This time he feinted low, went high, a collar drag, technically good, the kind of move that worked on people who committed too hard to defending the legs. His hand slapped onto Adrian's collar and pulled, and the rotation was right. The mechanics were there. Adrian turned with it, not against it. With it, which is the opposite of what the technique required, and the result was that Victor's drag went through empty space, and Adrian ended up behind him, one arm across the chest, the other finding the back of the neck. And the takedown was not spectacular, but it was total. Victor's feet left the ground for just a moment, and then the mat came up fast. The impact was audible. Victor hit on his side, not his back, which meant he'd had some awareness of the fall, which meant he was still present and moving. He scrambled immediately to his knees. Adrian let him get there. He stepped back, gave space, waited. Victor stood up. His GI was skewed, one lapel pulled hard to the side. There was mat burn starting on his left cheekbone, visible from across the room. The room had gone past quiet into something else. The particular stillness that forms when people stop pretending to be doing other things and simply watch. Victor reset, breathing through his nose now, measured the way he breathed when he was working. He rolled his left shoulder. Something had caught there in the fall, from the way his hand moved to it briefly before he stopped himself. "You're stalling," Victor said. "You're countering, but you're not engaging. That's a defensive game." "It's working," Adrian said. Victor's jaw tightened. He shot again. Not a double leg this time, but a single, grabbing the right leg low, trying to finish with a trip. He got the leg. Adrian hopped once, adjusted his weight, and the trip went nowhere. And when Victor drove harder to compensate, Adrian's hand found the back of his head, and the other arm came across, and the guillotine locked before Victor understood it was happening. Not standing. They went down together, Adrian pulling guard with the choke locked, and the arm was across the throat, tight and specific. And Victor's face went from red to a particular shade of deeper red, and his hands were pulling at Adrian's arm, working, hands that had trained for years working a problem with every tool they had. The tools weren't enough. Emily watched Victor's hand start to drift, the losing of fine motor control that happens before the losing of consciousness. And she watched his hips buck twice, hard, desperate, and she watched the whole struggling mass of them on the mat go briefly more violent and then go still. Victor's hand slapped the mat. Once. Adrian released him immediately. Not after a beat, not with any held moment of demonstration. The submission was acknowledged, and he opened, completely and at once, and rolled to the side and stood. And by the time he was on his feet, Victor was still pushing himself up, slower than Tuesday, because this time his body had actually been taken somewhere, and the road back was longer. The room was silent. Victor got to his knees, got one foot under him, got upright. He stood in the center of the mat with his gi wrong and his cheeks starting to show color, and his breathing audible from everywhere in the room. And he looked at Adrian, and whatever he saw there made him look away first. Marcus Holloway unfolded his arms. He walked onto the mat. Slowly, with the weight of a man who has decided that the controlled version of events has officially expired, and something uncontrolled is now in progress. He walked to the center of the room, and he stood between Victor and Adrian, and he looked at both of them, and then he looked, for a long moment, at the students assembled around the edges of his gym. Emily watched him calculate. She could see it happening. The read of the room, the understanding that something had shifted in the architecture of this space, that the hierarchy he maintained was visible in a way it usually wasn't, that the 30 years of authority he'd built in this building were being held up to a specific light. She watched him decide. "You," Marcus said, and he was looking at Adrian, and his voice had lost the smooth calibration of earlier in the week. Something had gotten into it. "Think you can come into my gym twice and make a fool out of my people and just—" He submitted, Adrian said. Clean. I'm talking. Marcus's voice went up on the second word in a way that it hadn't before. You think because you can throw people around on a mat that you know something? You think that means something here? The room was very still. Emily's hand was tight around the strap of her bag. Adrian looked at Marcus the same way he'd looked at Victor. Not hostile, not warm, just present, precisely present. The look of someone who was not going to look away. Your student choked my sister unconscious, Adrian said. 2 days ago, on this mat, in front of you. You already said that. I'm saying it again. He paused. Because you didn't do anything about it the first time. Marcus's chest expanded. He was breathing harder than he'd been 30 seconds ago, and the change was visible, and Emily thought, watching him, feeling the shift in the room's gravity, that this was the moment, this specific juncture, where Marcus would either absorb the thing being said to him and respond honestly, or where the ego that had built Iron Crest and populated it with victors would make the decision for him. She saw the decision made. She saw it happen in his face, in the set of his jaw, in the way he pulled himself to his full height and his eyes went flat. He reached down to his belt. He unknotted it. Slow, deliberate, the full theatrical weight of the gesture. He held it in one hand and looked at Adrian with the expression of a man who believed he was about to end a conversation. You want to talk about what I do and don't do? Marcus said. On my mat, in my gym. He let the belt hang from his hand. Then let's settle it on the mat. You and me. 1 round. Everything stops, everything gets handled, right here, right now, in front of everybody. The room made a sound, not words, the involuntary vocal response of 20 people processing something they had not expected. Emily felt her stomach drop. Adrian looked at the belt in Marcus's hand. He looked at Marcus's face. He looked at the room around them. Daniel near the wall, the 2 ringers watching from their corners, the assembled students in their ring of silence. He looked at Emily. She gave nothing. She kept her face still. Because she knew, she had known her brother for 34 years, that her reaction in this moment was the only variable he was weighing. He looked back at Marcus. Okay, he said. Somewhere near the far wall, one of the ringers exhaled. The sound of it was brief and sharp and contained something that might have been surprise and might have been something else. Marcus reached up and hung his belt over the equipment rack beside him, a gesture that was supposed to look like preparation and looked instead like a man storing something he was afraid to lose. He turned back to the center of the mat, and what was in his eyes was not quite what Emily had expected. Not pure anger, not the clean heat of someone who'd been pushed and was pushing back. There was something murkier underneath it, something that looked, from where she was standing, a lot like the particular expression of a man who had just committed himself to something he hadn't fully thought through. Adrian rolled up his sleeves. He had a scar on his left forearm she'd never noticed before, or had noticed and forgotten. The way you forget things that have been present so long they become part of the background. It ran from the inside of the wrist to just below the elbow, old and pale, the kind that comes from something that had happened a long time ago, in a context she would probably never fully know. He stepped to the center of the mat. Marcus stepped to meet him. The class arranged itself around them, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and outside somewhere the rain had started again against the windows, and the gym held its breath. Nobody started a timer. There was no buzzer, no formal signal, no ritual acknowledgement of beginning. Marcus simply moved, and the round existed because he made it exist. The particular prerogative of a man who had run this room for 3 decades and understood that controlling the start of things was the first form of control available. He came in technical. That was the first thing Adrian registered, not the aggression of Victor, not the forward-rushing confidence of someone who led with his physical advantage. Marcus was 61 years old, and he knew exactly what 61 felt like, and he had spent the last decade compensating for it with craft. His grips were precise. His angle was slightly off-center before contact, which meant he was already planning the geometry 2 moves ahead. His base was low and settled, the base of someone who had drilled takedown defense so many times it had stopped being a technique and become a physical fact. He was good, legitimately, meaningfully good in a way that Victor, with all his athleticism and aggression, was not quite, Because what Marcus had was not power, but understanding, and understanding aged better. He got a grip on Adrian's collar and sleeve and pulled, testing the response, reading the resistance the way you read a wall for load-bearing points before you try to move through it. Adrian gave him a partial response, not the full one, enough to communicate that the grip was felt, not enough to reveal the full picture of what was behind it. Marcus adjusted, pulled again, different angle, driving his elbow down to break the posture. Adrian's chin dropped half an inch, and that was all. A sound from somewhere in the room, not words, just the quality of attention shifting, the collective processing of people who trained hard enough to understand what they were watching. Marcus transitioned, released the sleeve grip, shot his hand to the back of the neck, tried to force the head down and set up a trip. It was a sequence Adrian had felt before, not from Marcus specifically, but from the archetype Marcus represented, the instructor who had absorbed enough technique over decades that his attacks came in logical chains, each move setting up the next. The grammar of the art built so deep it operated without thought. The problem with grammar that operated without thought was that it was readable. Adrian moved his head offline, not back. Offline, which killed the leverage of the neck grip without giving the retreat that Marcus was braced to capitalize on. His own hand found Marcus's elbow, not the wrist, the elbow, which was not a standard grip, and took Marcus a half second to adjust to, and in that half second, Adrian stepped inside. Not to throw, just to be there. In the space Marcus had assumed would be empty, close enough that the separation required for most techniques evaporated. This close, size was less relevant than structure, and structure was what Adrian had built his whole vocabulary around. Marcus tried to create distance, pushed at Adrian's chest. Adrian went with the push, absorbed it, turned with it, and the turn ended with Marcus's arm across Adrian's shoulder in a position that was one small commitment away from something that would require a tap. Marcus felt it. He went very still for a moment, the specific stillness of someone doing rapid triage on their options. Then he stepped back and disengaged, resetting to neutral, and the room breathed. "Okay," Marcus said, under his breath, low, not performing it, just saying it to himself or to the situation. They reset, came together again. This time, Marcus went to the body, both hands dropping low, away from the collar work, trying to change the framework of the engagement. He was adapting in real time, which was the thing that had made him dangerous for 30 years. He got a grip around Adrian's midsection and turned for a hip throw, the mechanics clean and committed, and it should have worked. The weight differential was real, the angle was right, the execution was honest. What he hit was a base he hadn't expected. Adrian's right foot dropped back and out in the precise geometry that killed the hip throw's leverage, and his weight shifted low in the same instant, and Marcus's throw, instead of lifting, found a counterweight it couldn't overcome. The technique died in his hands. He held on, tried to redirect to a different finish, and that was the moment of holding on rather than releasing, where the error compounded. Adrian took the angle Marcus had given him by overcommitting. His arm went across the chest. His weight dropped behind Marcus's center, not dramatically, not with any wasted force, just the specific repositioning of someone who has found the hinge point and is using it. Marcus went down. It wasn't like Tuesday's throw with Victor. It wasn't spectacular. It was quiet and complete and somehow more definitive for being neither. The kind of takedown that happens when someone simply puts you exactly where they intend to, without argument or resistance or drama, because the decision was made before your body understood it was happening. Marcus landed on his back. Adrian followed him to the ground, moved immediately to side control, and the pressure that settled across Marcus's chest was not the brute weight of a heavier man, but something structural, points of contact distributed with a precision that made the position feel less like grappling and more like architecture. Marcus bridged. Hard, with everything he had, the kind of bridge that opened space against most opponents. Nothing moved. He turned to his side, tried to create a frame, his forearm driving at Adrian's neck. Adrian's head moved an inch to accommodate it, and the frame found nothing useful. Marcus tried to recover guard, the reliable reset, the position he'd spent decades building, the place where his technique was sharpest. And Adrian's weight redistributed with the attempt in a way that kept him where he was without appearing to. It was the most unsettling thing Emily had ever watched on a mat. Not because it was violent or fast or impressive, because it looked from the outside almost effortless. And she knew enough now to understand how much was happening inside that effortlessness. Every adjustment Marcus made was met with a counter that had been prepared before the adjustment occurred, not reactively but preemptively. The way you don't dodge a punch after it's thrown, but position yourself where the punch isn't going to be. Marcus was breathing hard. She could hear it from the mat's edge. He tried twice more, a hip escape, an arm across for a kimura grip, and neither of them produced a result that differed meaningfully from where he'd started. The position held him as thoroughly as a locked room. His hand came up, hesitated, came up again, hit the mat. Adrian released him and stood up in one motion and stepped back. And the standing happened so smoothly that for a moment the watching student seemed not to register that it was over. Then the room's silence changed quality, from the held silence of watching to the open silence of aftermath, and someone near the back exhaled a long, shaking breath that seemed to speak for everyone. Marcus stayed on his back for a moment. His chest moved. His eyes went to the ceiling. The same fluorescent tube that flickered, the same concrete above it. He sat up. He looked at his hands, then at Adrian, then at the room around him, at the students, at the two ringers near the wall, at Victor standing near the equipment rack with an expression Emily had never seen on his face before and didn't have a ready name for. Then he looked at Emily. She held his gaze. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. Marcus put one hand on the mat and pushed himself to his feet with the particular deliberateness of a man who is conscious of being watched, doing it. He stood. He straightened his GI. He looked at Adrian. "Where did you train, Kiching?" he said. His voice had changed. The authority register was gone, not replaced by anything submissive, just emptied of performance. It was the voice of someone asking an actual question because they actually wanted the answer. "Different places," Adrian said. Same answer as before. "That's not an answer." "I know." Marcus looked at him. "Military?" A pause. 11 years, Adrian said. The room absorbed that. Emily watched it move through the faces around her. The recalibration, the quiet reassessment. The two ringers exchanged a glance that communicated something she couldn't fully read. "What branch?" Marcus asked. "Army. Combat?" Another pause. "Yeah." Marcus nodded slowly. He seemed to be doing the math on something, running the numbers on an equation that kept producing results he hadn't budgeted for. "What you did on the ground," he said. "That's not standard combatives. That's something else." "I picked things up," Adrian said. "From where?" "From people who were good at keeping other people alive in bad situations." He paused. "And from some reading. And from a long time of having nothing to do but think about how bodies move." Marcus looked at the mat between them. Something moved across his face. Not quite respect, not quite shame. Something in the compound territory between them. "You've been doing this a long time," he said. "Long enough," Adrian said. "A beat." "Victor," Marcus said, without turning around. Victor from across the room. "Yeah." "Come here." The walk across the mat took maybe 6 seconds. Victor moved with the mechanical compliance of someone who understood that the moment had changed shape around him and hadn't yet figured out what the new shape required. He stopped a few feet from Marcus. He didn't look at Adrian. "Look at me," Marcus said. Victor looked at him. Did she tap? The question sat in the room like something physical, like an object someone had set down in the middle of the floor. Victor's jaw worked. He looked at Emily, briefly, then back at Marcus. Simple question, Marcus said. Did she tap? The silence stretched. Emily felt it stretch. She felt every person in the room feel it stretch. "Yeah," Victor said, low, the word sounding like it cost him something on its way out. "Yeah, she tapped." Nobody moved. "Okay," Marcus said. He turned from Victor to Emily. He stood there for a moment, hands at his sides, and he looked older than he had at the start of the evening. Not physically, but in some less measurable way, the way people age in real time when the version of themselves they've been presenting gets too heavy to hold. "That shouldn't have happened," he said. Emily looked at him. "No," she said. It shouldn't. I should have addressed it Tuesday. He stopped. Started again. I didn't address it Tuesday. No, she said again. You didn't. The room was listening to every word. She was aware of that, and she let herself be aware of it, because she had spent 14 months being aware of when she was supposed to make herself smaller, and she was done doing the calculations. I'm sorry, Marcus said. It landed flatly. Not because he didn't mean it, she thought, watching him, that he probably did mean it, in whatever way was available to a man who had spent 30 years building a room where meaning it hadn't been required. But meaning it and having done enough to deserve the weight of the words were different things, and the gap between them was visible. Okay, she said, not forgiving it, not refusing to, just acknowledging that the words had been said, that they existed now in the record of this room. Marcus nodded. He turned to the class, to the assembled students, the ringers, Daniel at the wall. Class is done, he said. Everybody go home. The departure took longer than usual. People moved slowly, the way people move after something that has rearranged the furniture of a familiar room, careful, recalibrating, not quite trusting the floor plan they'd memorized. The two ringers left without speaking to anyone, gym bags over shoulders, out the front door and into the wet parking lot. A few of the regular students stopped near the door in clusters, speaking in low voices. Daniel helped a newer student with his bag and said something Emily couldn't hear. Victor stayed. He was at the far end of the mat, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his knees pulled up and his G-jacket hanging open. He hadn't changed. He was just sitting there in the way that people sit when they're not ready to go somewhere but don't know what to do with staying. Emily was putting her wrist wrap in her bag when she became aware that he was looking at her, not with the calculating assessment of earlier in the week, with something that didn't have the usual Victor architecture at all. Something younger than it and less defended. She didn't go to him. She didn't have anything she wanted to say to him, and she didn't think he had a right to her attention as a vehicle for whatever he was working through. But she held his gaze for a moment because she was done looking away from things in this room, and then she went back to her bag. Adrian was by the side door, speaking quietly to Marcus. She finished packing and moved close enough to hear without inserting herself. Not going to pretend that fixes anything, Marcus was saying. He had his arms crossed, but differently than before. Not the authority posture, just a man with his arms folded because he didn't know what else to do with them. But I'm going to change the way the gym handles it. Protocols, something formal, written. Tapping is tapping, no discretion, automatic review. That's a start, Adrian said. I'm going to put Victor on probation, suspended from instruction pending a review period. He paused. And I'm going to bring in an outside set of eyes, someone without a stake in how this gym has operated. Another pause, longer. It should have been done years ago. Yes, Adrian said. It should. Marcus looked at him with the particular expression of a man who has heard an honest thing and is deciding whether to resent it or accept it. He seemed to land somewhere in between, which was probably the honest result. Why didn't you just leave Tuesday? Marcus asked. You could have taken your sister and walked. This wasn't your fight. Adrian looked at him. She's my sister. That's not a reason, not for what you did. You came back Thursday. You could have gone to the athletic commission, filed a complaint, let the process, Adrian said, would have taken months. And she would have been here twice a week for all of those months, and nothing in this room would have changed. He let that settle. I've seen what happens when you wait for the process in situations like this. I've seen it work, and I've seen it fail. The variable is usually whether somebody was willing to stand in the room and make it impossible to ignore. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You've done this before, he said. Not gyms, but situations, where you put yourself in. Some, Adrian said. And it always ends like this? Adrian looked at him with something that might have been, in a different version of his face, wry. No, he said. Not always. Marcus absorbed that. He looked at the mat. His mat, the canvas he'd rolled out himself 26 years ago, when Iron Crest was a rented space in a different building in a different part of the city, and he seemed to be having a conversation with it that Emily wasn't part of. You ever want to teach? He said. Adrian looked at him. I'm not offering anything, Marcus said quickly. I'm not in a position to offer anything right now. I'm just asking. No, Adrian said. I don't. Why not? He thought about it. Because teaching means believing the system works if you run it right. I'm not sure I believe that yet. He paused. Maybe someday. Marcus nodded. He uncrossed his arms, let them fall to his sides. He extended his hand. Adrian looked at it for a moment. Then he took it. The handshake lasted 2 seconds, firm, without theater. Two men who had occupied opposite sides of the same problem agreeing wordlessly that the immediate version of it was over, whatever that meant for everything that came after. Marcus walked toward his office. His footsteps were heavier than they'd been at the start of class. He pushed the door open, went inside, and didn't close it behind him, which was different from how he'd closed it Tuesday, and Emily thought that the open door was probably not an accident. She found Daniel near the front entrance, jacket on, waiting for nothing in particular. Hey, she said. Hey. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from sustained tension rather than physical exertion. You okay? Yeah. She thought about it. I don't know. Maybe. He nodded. For what it's worth, what you said to Marcus. On the record, in writing, that mattered, the way you said it. He looked at the mat. I should have backed you up more directly, not just in the moment, before. You said something when it counted, she said. I should have said something before it counted. He looked at her. There's a difference. She didn't argue with that because he was right. There was a difference. But she also understood the particular math of being a junior member of a hierarchy where the costs of speaking were real and the protection was minimal. And she had done the same math herself for 14 months, and she was not in a position to stand in the way of him working through that. What are you going to do? She asked. About training here? He shrugged. I don't know. See what the changes actually look like. Whether Marcus follows through or whether this is, he gestured vaguely, temporary. He paused. There's a gym in Southeast, smaller, woman who runs it, former competitor, runs a really clean room. I've been thinking about it for a while. Send me the name, Emily said. He looked at her. Yeah? Yeah. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, just the small recalibration of realizing that a decision he'd been circling was suddenly easier than it had been 5 minutes ago. Okay, he said. I will. He left. The front door swung shut behind him and the sound of the parking lot came through briefly. A car, rain on asphalt, the ordinary noise of a city that didn't know what had happened inside this building tonight. And then it was quiet again. Adrian came up beside her. He had his bag and his shoes and the slightly worn at the edges look of a man who had expended more than the physical count of the evening. You hear any of that? She said. Some. Marcus is putting Victor on probation, bringing in outside review. I heard. She looked at him. Do you believe him? Adrian looked toward the office. Through the window she could see Marcus at his desk. Not on the phone this time, just sitting, hands flat on the desk surface, looking at something she couldn't see from this angle. I think he means it right now, Adrian said. Whether he means it in 3 months depends on whether anybody holds him to it. And if nobody does, he looked at her. Then it starts over with somebody else's sister. She held that thought. The weight of it was specific and familiar. She had carried versions of it before, in smaller contexts, in rooms with less obvious stakes, and she recognized it as the weight of understanding that individual confrontations didn't automatically become systemic change, that the room could be moved and the room could settle back, and the only difference was sustained pressure over time. I could file a formal complaint, she said, with the State Athletic Commission, create a paper trail independent of whatever Marcus does internally. Adrian looked at her. Yeah, he said, you could. It would mean staying involved after tonight. It would. She looked at the mat. She looked at Victor, still sitting against the far wall in his open GI jacket, staring at the floor in front of him. She looked at the empty bench where Adrian had sat, where she'd sat beside him and watched Marcus make his phone call, where the whole second half of this had begun. Okay, she said. Okay you will, or okay you're thinking? Okay I will. She picked up her bag. I want to go home." He held the door for her. They walked out into the parking lot, into the rain that had gentled since earlier. Not stopped, just softened, the kind that lands on your face without weight. The neon sign buzzed behind them. One of the letters was still half dead. She unlocked the car and they got in, and she sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and the engine not yet running. "The scar," she said. "On your arm. I never asked." He looked at his left forearm. The scar was covered by his sleeve now, visible only as a slight difference in the fabric's drape. "Kabul," he said. "Second deployment. Doorway I went through that had something behind it I didn't expect." She let that sit. "Was it bad?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "For a while." "But you're okay now." He thought about that with the genuine consideration he gave most things. "Some days," he said, "more than before." She started the engine. The heater came on and the windshield began to clear, and the rain on the roof made its particular sound, the one she'd listened to since she was a kid, the Portland sound, the background noise of everything she'd ever known. And she pulled out of the lot and drove toward the street. Behind them, the neon sign of Ironcrest Combat Academy buzzed and flickered and kept its own small incomplete light against the dark. Victor Kane sat inside against the wall for a long time after the last person left. He sat there in the quiet of the empty gym, in the smell of disinfectant and old sweat, and the cooling of a room that had held too many people. And the silence was not the comfortable silence of a room that was his. It was the silence of a room that had stopped being his, that had belonged to him completely an hour ago, and now belonged to something more complicated. And the transition was not clean, and he was not, in this moment, the person he thought he'd been this morning. He didn't do anything with that. He wasn't sure yet what there was to do. But he sat with it in the quiet, which was more than he would have done 2 hours ago. And outside the rain came down, and somewhere across the city, a woman was driving her brother home and thinking about paper trails and the small, persistent work of not letting things go quiet before they were actually resolved. She filed the complaint the following Monday. Not impulsively, she spent the weekend thinking about it with the kind of deliberateness she brought to things that mattered, sitting at her kitchen table on Saturday morning with a coffee that went cold while she read through the Oregon State Athletic Commission's formal complaint process on her laptop. The language was dry and procedural, and she read every word of it twice. She pulled up the relevant statutes. She made notes on a yellow legal pad in her handwriting, which was small and precise, the handwriting of someone who had learned early that space on a page was limited and you should use it carefully. Adrian sat across from her for part of it, reading something on his phone, not hovering. Available if she needed him, not inserting himself into a process that was hers to run. On Sunday, she called Daniel. He walked her through what he'd witnessed, the specific sequence, the tap, Victor's response, and she wrote it down in her notes and asked him if he'd be willing to put it in writing. "Yeah," he said, without hesitation. Which was different from Tuesday, when it had taken longer, and she noticed the difference and filed it. She also called 2 other former Ironcrest students, a woman named Rosalind, who had trained there for 8 months before leaving abruptly the previous spring, and a man named Terrence, who'd been a regular for 2 years and then simply stopped showing up. She had their numbers from the gym's group text chain, which Marcus had never removed her from. Rosalind picked up on the second ring. When Emily explained what she was doing, there was a pause on the line. Not reluctance, more like the pause of someone who had been waiting for a specific kind of phone call without knowing they were waiting for it. "I have my own incident," Rosalind said. "Different from yours, but a breath, I've been sitting on it. Would you be willing to report it separately?" "Yes," Rosalind said. "Yeah, I would." Terrence didn't answer. She left a message. He called back that evening, and they talked for 40 minutes, and by the end he'd agreed to speak with the commission's investigator if one was assigned. She sent the formal complaint on Monday at 11:17 in the morning from her classroom's prep room during her lunch break, on her phone, sitting on a folding chair with the door closed. She read it through one final time before she hit send. It was 3 pages. It named Victor Kane. It named Ironcrest Combat Academy. It named Marcus Holloway by title and function. It was factual and specific, and it did not editorialize. She hit send. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the prep room, listening to the muffled sounds of the school, a class somewhere down the hall, a door, a bell. And then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. The commission acknowledged receipt within 48 hours. An investigator was assigned within the week, a woman named Patricia Osei, compact and methodical, who called Emily on a Wednesday afternoon and asked questions in the same careful, specific way Emily had learned to ask them. She did not perform sympathy. She took notes. She asked for the names of corroborating witnesses, which Emily provided. She asked whether Emily was aware of other potential complainants, which Emily said she was. "We'll be in contact," Patricia said at the end of the call. "How long does this typically take?" Emily asked. "Depends on what we find," Patricia said. "Could be 6 weeks, could be longer if additional complainants come forward and we need to broaden the scope." "Rosalind Marsh may contact you separately," Emily said. "She has her own incident." A brief pause on the line. "Thank you for letting me know," Patricia said. 3 weeks after the Thursday at Ironcrest, Emily walked into a different gym. It was in Southeast Portland, the way Daniel had described. Smaller than Ironcrest, older building, the kind that had been a machine shop or a warehouse in a previous life, and retained the bones of that history in its ceiling joists and its concrete floor under the mats. The sign above the door was hand-painted. Inside, a woman in her mid-40s with a second-degree black belt and a practical ponytail and a scar on her chin from a competition injury she'd never had fully repaired was running a class of 11 students through guard retention drills with the focused patience of someone who had been coaching long enough to have stopped being theatrical about it. Her name was Carla Mendez. She had competed at national level for 12 years and coached for 8, and her gym had a waiting list, which, in Emily's experience of Portland martial arts gyms, was either a very good sign or a sign of exclusivity that could mean anything. In Carla's case, it was the former. Daniel had sent the name and address as promised. He had also apparently sent a message to Carla in advance, because when Emily introduced herself at the front desk, Carla's expression was the specific expression of someone who already has context. "Daniel mentioned you might come by," she said. Not warmly, exactly. Carla Mendez didn't lead with warm. She led with direct. "Said you've been training 14, 15 months. 14, Emily said. "Blue belt?" "Yes." Carla looked at her for a moment. The particular evaluation of an experienced instructor reading a prospective student. Not judgmental. Clinical in the useful sense. "Come watch the end of class," she said. "See if the room fits." Emily watched. The room fit. She enrolled the following week. She didn't stop training at Ironcrest immediately. That surprised her. The fact that she went back twice more in the weeks after Thursday before she made the final decision. She went back partly because she'd paid through the end of the month, and partly because she wanted to see what Marcus was actually doing, whether the words he'd said in the empty gym had translated into anything structural, or whether they'd dissolved in the quiet the way promises made under pressure often did. The first time back, 2 weeks after Thursday, the format had changed. There was a printed policy on the front desk, laminated, which suggested it was meant to be permanent rather than provisional, about sparring safety protocols, tap acknowledgement, and the procedure for reporting concerns. It was typed in a font that was slightly too large for the space, which gave it the quality of something done quickly, but it existed. Victor was not in class. She asked no one about this. She didn't need to. Marcus ran the session himself, which was different from before. He usually delegated the Tuesday and Thursday evening classes to senior students. He drilled with the group, corrected technique, maintained a running commentary that was teaching rather than performing. He caught Emily's eye once during the session, briefly, and gave a short nod that communicated approximately nothing and approximately everything. She nodded back. The second visit, the week after, she brought the complaint acknowledgement paperwork. Not to show Marcus, the commission had told her not to discuss the active investigation with potential respondents. She brought it because she wanted to have it on her person. Because walking into that building with evidence of her own action in her bag felt like the right way to walk in. She trained. She was put with a newer student, a woman who'd been coming for 3 months, and they worked arm bars from guard, and it was fine. Unglamorous and functional, the daily work of getting better at something by doing it badly and then slightly less badly. After class, standing in the parking lot, She decided she was done. Not with training, not with the things she'd been building in herself since she first walked into a gym 14 months ago and discovered that her body could do more than she'd let it do, that she was capable of more resistance than she'd given herself credit for. That wasn't done. That was just beginning. She was done with this particular room. Done making the calculus of whether the space was safe enough, whether the authority structure was sound enough, whether the changes were real enough. Done spending mental energy on that calculus, when she could spend it on the work itself, in a room that didn't require it. She texted Carla Mendez that night and confirmed her enrollment. She did not text Marcus. She sent an email, brief and factual, informing him she was ending her membership and requesting a prorated refund for the remaining days. He replied within the hour. The refund would be processed. He understood. He wished her well in her training. The email was 3 sentences and contained nothing she could argue with, which was different from the man who had stood in front of her in an empty gym and said I should have addressed it Tuesday with the specific weight of a man who knew it was true. She accepted the difference. She didn't require him to be transformed. She required him to have moved, and he had moved, and whether he would keep moving was a question for time and for the commission's investigator and for the 11 other students who had been in that room on both Tuesdays, some of whom were still there, and some of whom, she suspected, would not be for much longer. Yet, she told Adrian about quitting Iron Crest over the phone on a Tuesday morning before she left for school. "Good," he said. "You don't think I should have stayed longer? Made sure the changes stuck?" "Your job isn't to make sure his changes stick," Adrian said. "You filed the complaint. That's the external accountability. What he does with his gym isn't on you. It feels like leaving is letting it go. Leaving is choosing a better room. Those aren't the same thing." She thought about that. She was standing in her kitchen with her jacket on and her bag on her shoulder, keys in hand, running about 4 minutes behind. "I keep thinking about the other people who are still there," she said. "The newer students." "I know," he said. "If something happens to one of them, Emily." His voice was quiet but present. "You filed a complaint with the State Athletic Commission. You provided corroborating witnesses. You created a formal record that makes it significantly harder for Marcus Holloway to look the other way. That's not leaving it alone. That's the most effective thing you could have done." A pause. "You can't stay in every room that has a problem until the problem gets fixed. You'd never train anywhere." She exhaled. "I know." "You know, but you still feel it." "Yeah." "That's not a flaw," he said. "It's just something you carry for a while and then set down." She looked at the clock on the microwave. "I have to go. I'm late." "Go," he said. "You're doing fine." She went. "God." The commission's investigation took 9 weeks. At the end of it, Patricia Osei called Emily on a Thursday afternoon, the day the whole thing had started, which Emily noticed with the particular awareness of someone who had become sensitive to small symmetries. Iron Crest Combat Academy had received a formal censure. Victor Kane's instructor certification had been suspended for 6 months, with reinstatement conditional on completing a supervised training review and demonstrating compliance with updated safety protocols. Marcus Holloway had been issued a formal warning. Not a suspension, Patricia explained, because this was his first formal complaint, but a warning that would remain on the gym's athletic commission record for 3 years and would factor heavily into any future proceedings. Rosalind Marsh had filed separately, as she'd said she would. Her complaint had been incorporated into the investigation and substantiated. "What happens next?" Emily asked. "In terms of enforcement, the commission conducts follow-up visits at the gym on an unannounced schedule for the next 18 months, Patricia said. Any further substantiated complaints during that period trigger escalated sanctions up to and including revocation of operating license." Emily sat with that for a moment. "Okay," she said. "You did the right thing," Patricia said. Then, after a brief pause, "I don't say that to many people, but you documented carefully. You were specific. You didn't overstate. That made the investigation cleaner than most." "Thank you," Emily said. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table and looked at the yellow legal pad she'd started 9 weeks ago, still on the table because she hadn't put it away, its pages covered in her small, careful handwriting. Notes from the complaint process, witness contact information, follow-up dates, case number. the record of something she had decided to take seriously. She closed the legal pad, turned it over so the cover faced up. Then she went and changed for training. Carla Mendez's gym on a Thursday evening was a different atmosphere from anything Emily had trained in before. Smaller class? 8 students, sometimes 10. No visible hierarchy of the kind Iron Crest had operated on, where seniority translated to spatial ownership. People made room for each other. A brown belt named Samuel consistently partnered with the newest students and drilled at their speed rather than his, which at Iron Crest would have been considered a waste, and here was simply what you did. Carla coached with the specificity of someone who had been a competitor long enough to understand that the distance between good and very good was almost always in the details, and she communicated that specificity without condescension. When she corrected Emily's hip escape, "You're coming up before you've created the frame, you're giving away the position before you own it," it landed as information rather than judgment, and Emily adjusted, and the next repetition was different, measurably different, in a way she could feel. She was getting better. Slowly, unglamorous, in the incremental way that actual skill develops when you stop spending energy on managing the room and start spending it on the work. Sparring at the end of class was lighter than Iron Crest, the default pressure calibrated to the learning frame rather than the competition frame. It took Emily a few sessions to recalibrate her own defaults, to stop bracing for the higher intensity that had become her normal. When she finally relaxed into the lower baseline, she realized how much energy she'd been spending at Iron Crest on management. The constant vigilance, the reading of partners, the preparation for being pushed past the line. Without that overhead, she could actually think. She caught a triangle one evening, a clean one, set up properly with the hip escape she'd been correcting. The angle right, the leg position right. Her partner, a purple belt named Yuki, tapped cleanly and said nice before they reset, and the word was so unremarkable, so simply descriptive of a thing that had happened, that Emily almost didn't register it. Then she did. And something small and stubborn inside her, something that had been compressed since the night she'd woken up on the mat of Iron Crest with the lights blurring and Victor standing over her laughing, loosened just slightly, not healed. She didn't have a word for what it was, just moved, shifted. The way a window that's been painted shut moves the first time after someone puts real effort into it. She saw Adrian on a Sunday in November at their mother's house in Northeast Portland for a dinner that had no occasion other than the fact that their mother had decided it was time and had communicated this through the specific maternal mechanism of describing in detail what she was cooking until both of them agreed to come. Their mother, Ruth, was 63 and had strong opinions about table placement and very few opinions about subjects she hadn't directly experienced, which made conversations with her refreshingly grounded. She had been told the broad outline of what had happened at Iron Crest, not because Emily had sat her down for a formal account, but because Ruth asked direct questions and Emily had stopped deflecting them. Ruth had listened, asked 3 specific questions, and said, at the end, "Good, you handled it." And then she'd moved on to the logistics of the refund, which she felt should have been larger, and her opinion about the regulatory oversight of martial arts facilities in the state of Oregon, which she had apparently researched independently. Emily had looked across the room at Adrian while their mother talked and found him looking back at her with the ghost of the same, not-quite smile he'd given her on the mat before all of this started, and she'd felt something very simple and very hard to name. That was then. Now it was November, and the 3 of them were at the dinner table with the specific comfort of a room that had held them for most of their lives, the familiar weight of the chairs and the smell of the house and the sound of rain against the kitchen window, because this was Portland and it was November, and that was simply how it was. Ruth asked Adrian about his plans. He had been taking 2 courses at Portland Community College, a writing course and something in organizational psychology, which he'd mentioned once briefly, without elaboration. Ruth had remembered and followed up, because she always followed up. "Still going," he said. "The writing one's harder than I expected." "Harder how?" Ruth asked. "They want you to describe things from the inside," he said. "Not what happened. What it felt like from inside the person it was happening to." He turned his water glass. "I keep writing from the outside." "That sounds like a you problem," Ruth said. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Emily looked at him. He'd lost some of the compressed quality she'd noticed when he'd first stepped into Iron Crest, Not much, not in any dramatic way, but something had given a small amount. He slept better, he'd said, some days. Are you going to keep at it? She asked. The courses. For now, he said. I don't know what it leads to, but he thought about it. It's the first thing in a while where the not knowing doesn't bother me as much as it used to. Ruth looked at him for a moment, then looked at Emily, then went back to her food, which was the most Ruth thing she could have done and communicated, in its way, everything. Done. Emily tested for purple belt in late January. The testing was at Carla's gym, observed by Carla and a visiting instructor from an affiliated academy in Seattle, who Carla had invited for the evaluation. 4 students tested for various ranks that evening. Emily was one of 2 testing for purple. She was nervous in the parking lot. She sat in her car for a few minutes, which she allowed herself, and thought about the last time she'd been on a mat that felt high stakes and what that had produced. She thought about waking up on the floor of Iron Crest with the lights wrong and Victor laughing, and she thought about the particular stubborn thing that had formed in her in the weeks after. Not rage, not resolution exactly, more like a clarified understanding of what she was doing this for. She was doing it for this, for the ability to be in a room under pressure and remain functional, for the thing that lived in her body now that hadn't been there 18 months ago, for the knowledge that she could take a hard position and hold it and not dissolve. She got out of the car and went inside. The test lasted 90 minutes. Techniques, drilling, positional work, and finally live sparring with both the testing partner and a designated upper belt. Emily's upper belt partner was Samuel, the brown belt who drilled at the new student's speed. He did not take it easy on her for the test. That was the point. The test required a real read. But he was clean, and he was safe, and she knew it, and knowing it let her be fully present in the work instead of split between the work and the management of it. She got the triangle twice. Different setups. She got caught in a kimura she didn't see coming and tapped and reset and moved on. Because that was also the point. Not to be perfect, to be honest about what you could and couldn't hold. When it was over, Carla pulled her aside while the visiting instructor signed paperwork. You've been through something, Carla said. Not a question. Emily looked at her. Is it that obvious? You train like someone who learned that relaxing has consequences, Carla said. You're getting better at letting that go. You're not there yet. She paused. You'll get there. Emily didn't say anything for a moment. I was at another gym, she said, before I came here. I know, Carla said. Daniel told me some of it. Emily looked at the mat. I filed a complaint. With the commission. It went through. Carla was quiet for a moment. She had the expression of someone filing information carefully, treating it with the weight it deserved rather than the weight that was convenient. Good, she said finally. Just that. Yeah, Emily said. The gym. Is it still operating? Under enhanced oversight, yeah. Carla nodded. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it's enough, and sometimes it's not. But you did the part that was yours to do. She looked at Emily with the direct, uncomplicated regard that was her default mode. That's all anybody can do. The visiting instructor called them back. He said 2 sentences about each student's performance and then handed out the new belts. And Emily's hands were not quite steady when she took hers, and she tied it on herself because that was what you did, and it sat differently than the blue belt had. Not heavier exactly, but more present, more earned in the specific way that things are earned when you understand what they cost. Carla shook her hand. Samuel said about time and grinned. Yuki, who was there to watch, said nothing and held up one fist in a small, genuine gesture of acknowledgement. Emily looked at the belt at her waist in the mirror near the equipment wall. Looked at herself looking at it. She didn't feel like a different person. She didn't feel transformed or arrived or any of the things that moments like this were supposed to feel like in the version of the story where everything was clean. What she felt was tired and real and slightly wrung out, and very specifically, solidly herself. The same person who had driven to Iron Crest on a rainy Tuesday in October, who had been choked unconscious and woken up to a laughing man, who had decided not to be quiet about it, who had made every decision between that moment and this one with imperfect information and genuine intent and the ongoing unfinished work of figuring out what she was made of. That was enough. It was actually exactly enough. Victor Kane did not return to Iron Crest after his suspension began. He trained, as far as anyone knew, at a gym in Beaverton for a while, then disappeared from the local circuit entirely. His Instagram went dormant. The promotional materials on Iron Crest's front desk were updated, and his name was not on them. Whether this constituted a reckoning or a relocation was a question Emily didn't spend much time on. She had made her record. The commission had made its finding. What Victor did with the remaining territory of his life was his to navigate, and she did not have the bandwidth to monitor it, and she had decided, in the deliberate way she decided things, to spend her bandwidth elsewhere. Marcus Holloway sent her one more email, in February. It was longer than the previous ones, 8 sentences, which for Marcus was long. He said the gym had restructured its safety protocols. He said 2 new instructors had joined, both of whom had signed formal acknowledgement of the updated policies. He said he had been thinking since October about the things Adrian had said in the empty gym, and that thinking had been, he wrote, uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not characterize what had happened as anything other than what it was. He ended with, "I hope your training is going well." She read it twice. Then she wrote back 4 sentences. "Thank you for the update. I'm training well. I hope the changes hold. Take care of your people." She hit send and closed the app and went to make coffee, and the February rain did its Portland thing against her kitchen window. And somewhere across the city, her brother was probably sitting in a classroom trying to learn how to describe things from the inside, and Carla Mendez was opening her gym for the 6:30 morning class. And Rosalind Marsh had mentioned in a text 2 weeks ago that she was thinking about training again somewhere new when she was ready. Things did not resolve cleanly. That was the fact underneath all the other facts. Systems changed slowly, and sometimes not at all. And the people inside them changed at their own pace and in their own direction, and the gap between doing the right thing and seeing the right thing take hold was often long and often thankless. But Emily had made her record. She had put the true account into the formal machinery of accountability, with her name on it, in writing, and it existed now in a way that couldn't be quietly undone. She had found a room worth training in, and she was training in it. She had watched her brother walk onto a mat for the first time since Kabul and do the thing he did, and she had watched it remind him of something about himself that 11 years and 3 deployments and whatever dark geography lived between them had been working steadily to take away. She didn't know if it had helped him. She thought it had, a little. Some days, more than before. She poured her coffee. She drank it standing at the window. She watched the rain. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary morning. Cars and bikes, and a woman walking a dog, and the sound of a delivery truck somewhere close. The accumulated, unglamorous texture of regular life going regularly on. Emily Brooks had a purple belt and a formal complaint on record and a gym that fit her and a brother who answered the phone. She had woken up on a cold mat once and chosen not to make that the end of the story. That was enough. It was the kind of enough that compounded over time. Not loud, not spectacular, but real and stubborn, and hers. The measure of real strength is not how many people you can put down. It's whether you're willing to stand up for someone when standing up actually costs you something.